It was all recorded music beforehand, but the honest way to answer that is that I'd have to go through it piece by piece. Because everything had a slightly different treatment. For example, the Yasin piece that you see at the very end, I don't know if everyone was in the room when we showed the first film, but the first film, Peculiar Contrast, Perfect Light, which by the way got titled that, I think the day before the film, which is just a bar from Yasin. That last scene was never in the script, and it was never supposed to be in the film, and it was never really in the musical script either. But I know Virgil really wanted Yasin to rap, and he was sending me messages like, "Are we going to get hip hop? Are we going to get hip hop? Are we going to get the hip hop?" And it was kind of like very clear that that's what he wanted, and I wanted it too. But I also knew that Yasin at that stage in his career, the last thing in the world that he would ever do is do like Umi Says or some tune that we know by him. You know, he wasn't trying to do what we consider conventional hip hop, and so I had to do this sort of job of working around what would be right for the artists, but also what would be right for us, and also what would be right for the wider community of creatives that I was working on that show, because it was wider than normal. It wasn't a case of total musical autonomy, which is what I was kind of used to be honest, because I was collaborating with Asma and other musical heads and other creatives, and also movement, and there was a bigger picture to consider, so it wasn't just about what tune I thought would be cool. And I tried to get an answer, and then in the end, I mean that in a good way. I mean in a kind of like we're thinking about it way with Yasin. And while the actual filming was happening at the Tennis Club de Paris, I went out to the smoking area and spoke to him, and I was like, what about if we did something where you sort of like did one of your pieces, but we also referenced Doom, but we did it like post-punk style? And he was like, yeah, I'm in. So we took the old ESG record, UFO, which is a classic New York record that's played at the wrong speed at 33. And I just happened to have it recorded into my computer at what we consider the right speed, which is the wrong speed, 33 RPM. And we found a broom cupboard upstairs, and we begged the film crew to do one more shot. Like, they were not having it. They were like, we are done with our film. I remember. You were there, right?
Yeah, it took hours to get the actual moment recorded.
Yeah. And then in the end, he had one take. So what you see there is just one take. He did that one time. And the piece was recorded like about 20 minutes before that upstairs in a little broom cupboard. So everything was recorded differently. On that one, we worked with an amazing producer called Asma, the artist Asmara. She's one half of a duo that's known as Nguzu. And it was amazing to work with her because she brought in some incredible musicians, including a harp player from Detroit, and I forget the name of her sax player. Do you remember his name? Depiwa. There was a few amazing musicians that came in to work with us, and one of our original calls was actually probably the first time that we were working together. Maybe we were referencing about poetry, and I'd actually made a documentary about the New York Poets Cafe when I was like 18. It was my first trip to New York ever, and Saul Williams knew me since then, so I just picked up the phone to him and was like, "Do you remember me?" And sure enough, he did, and it was very important for us that he came and did his most famous poem over Asma's music. There's also a reference to Baldwin in there, which is part of the narrative, etc. Stranger in the Village, which is one of the most important parts of the reference in there. So everything that you hear there is bespoke music that's recorded, pre-recorded, that they're kind of miming over during the thing, and it's all original music. Same thing for Aim and Break. Apart from Inner City Life by Goldie, which you hear at the end, every single other piece is bespoke. The first piece that you hear is by Goldie, the second piece is by I Made, and then I commissioned a guy called El Michel's Affair to do a couple of original pieces, which I got Shabaka to play on. And for everything that you hear, there's like hours and hours on the cutting room floor that we never used. Original stuff by Jizza, original compositions that, that we were lucky enough to record in the studio. And then the real thing that I want to sort of get to in answer to your question is not necessarily the prep, but more the edit. Because in a fashion show, obviously it gets techie when they say, okay, we're cutting 3 looks or we're cutting 5 looks and I have to lose 2 minutes or whatever, but really that just means I'm shaving time, so it's not that deep. But with this film, I have a witness right here. Well, in fact, I have two. With Aim and Break, it was the only time where I actually had to mix backwards, because there was just one bit that had to sync with Jizza's vocal, and the film team kept taking bits out. And obviously in music we work in bars and beats, we don't work in minutes and seconds. So, you know, one cut can mess up a musical flow, and obviously I'm not going to stand by anything that doesn't mix right or land on the one or feel rhythmically sound or whatever. So that was the biggest challenge in making films, is that I'm called to this edit suite and I see it at 11 a.m. and then I'm there until 11 a.m. the next day, and that's when they're handing it in, and that's the bit where our work starts. So it was like a 26-hour edit, and our bit was at the end, and there was all sorts of creative questions at the end, like should this come out, should that come out? But the real challenge is keeping it musical, because decisions get made about scenes and it messes up the flow. So it's the show that we kind of had to find a point where it locked, and then I mixed everything in sequence sort of backwards, but each thing has to kind of also line up with a scene. It was really intense. But yeah, so that was the process. It was more like original compositions and then mixing it in the edit in a way that flows with the film. And I learned a lot.
Plus choreography.
Plus choreography, so everything's got to sync with the choreography as well.
Movement of the models
Yep.
being one sort of time,
Yep.
and then the movement of the dancers being a different sort of time with the music.
Yeah. Which is no problem if I get to decide where the frames go, but I don't get to decide. They're deciding. And so you kind of do this perfect. To Mahfuz's point, you know, there were times when I had, is it Malik? I had Malik locking into kind of like perfect, you know, when you see him do that move on Peculiar Contrast where he's coming out like that in the green jacket, you know, I had a beautiful musical motif like locked perfectly to that. You see the bit where he's the businessman. And likewise in Aim and Break, we had so many, Josh Johnson's choreography, I was locking beats and motifs and parts of records to movement. And then of course they come with a new edit and it all goes out. And so then you get to a point where you're like, well, as long as the dojo doors open on the beat, and as long as like the Goldie beat drops when he takes the sword, and like we hit these important marks, then I just have to sort of surrender to those things not working out, because we've only got 24 hours. But you know, when you watch the film, you'll see all of those little moments that we hit. And I'm glad you asked the question, because it was definitely a challenge when you're working with like non-musical editors, not non-musical directors, very musical directors. But sometimes some of the team, they're looking at what works visually and they don't give a shit about the sound, and then everything goes out. Anyway, you get what I'm trying to say. But
imagine it is a fashion film.
Yeah.
That's the thing. The thing is, like, the collection is still the most important thing.
Absolutely.
The film exists to showcase the collection. So you'll have these scenarios where you'll like lock and edit, and then someone on the LV side, on the LV internal side, will just be like, you didn't see the glove. Like the whole point of the look was the glove. You didn't see the glove. And then you're going back into the footage, trying to find a clip that has the glove, and then you're blowing what Benji did right up. And then, you know what I mean?
And then like we go live in 45 minutes.
You know, but that was, I mean, the time was really, really aggressive.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I mean, they were cutting cameras off, remember? Like at one point we just took a handy cam and went rogue to finish some of the clips. Like we were just like, is that camera live? Let's go. While the set was turning off, lights were turning off behind us while we were shooting.
Also in Peculiar Contrast, we were just remembering when we were sitting there watching it, that the first film that you watched, they hired like some super Star Trek, Starship Enterprise level, like Death Star 4K editing suite outside, you know, where everyone went into afterwards. But it got to 6 a.m. and they were like, yeah, your time's up. Your time's up, you only booked it till 6. And LV were like, yeah, that's what we booked. They're booked for another job. You've got to find another solution. So the only place that would take us was a Hotel Ibis or whatever it's called, right opposite. So the film was actually edited and finished in the lobby of a Hotel Ibis while like people were coming down and eating their breakfast buffet or whatever. And we're finishing the thing on headphones and editing. And the same thing is true with Aim and Break. It was a bit more of a like professional setting because we were in this place called Everest. But I was like, are you sure you need me at 11 a.m. for this edit? Because I reckon you're gonna wrap at like 7, 8 p.m. so I'm going to come in at like 3 or 4 and watch the edit or whatever. They're like, no, you have to be there at 11 a.m. So we came at 11 a.m. The film edit didn't get finished till 11 a.m. the next day, and then we did the music. Well, no, we started the music about 5, and then as it finally got locked at 11, we finished the music at 2. By the way, this is going live at 2:30 to the world, and it's also being shown at a cinema by Virgil in Saint-Germain at 2:30. And each time you render a film like that, as you probably know, it takes like half an hour just to render it. So they kept rendering it, and to your point, that bit where Goldie takes the sword was like out each time. And I was saying, no, just move it so the beat drops as he takes the sword. And the beat drop and where the dojo opens and everything just kept being out. So I kept making them render it again. And each time it takes 30 or 40 minutes. And obviously LV are calling, everyone's like stressing, screaming down the phone. I was like, no. You just, and in those moments you have to kind of like learn how to hold the line and just like have the steel to be like, okay, we're gonna get, and then on the final one, it hit. I was like, approved, send. They sent it by WeTransfer, not even Dropbox. I remember they sent it to the cinema by WeTransfer, and it went up, and I walked from there via the hotel, took a shower, went to Saint-Germain, and as I arrived, it was downloading. At which point Virgil was like, hey, we should make a playlist for the for the cinema, and we watched it that day. So yeah, it was a real education in filmmaking at speed, and I'm really glad you asked the question because the process was definitely different. So
Thank you for the answer.
thanks, man.